In every stage of life, a woman has the opportunity to make important decisions that can maximize her health and prolong her life. At the Washington Women's Center, we have the in-depth knowledge and breadth of experience in all facets of women's health care. We're committed to helping women get started on and to continue on the path to good health by helping them make healthy decisions along the way and by showing the way to achieving balance and wellness. This series of women's health programs is designed to offer women of all stages of life the information they need to live a healthy life.
Okay, so I wanted to just go over what is cancer genetics about, what do we do as genetic counselors and geneticists in cancer genetics, and how does that apply to people that are concerned about family histories of cancer. So the main thing we do is evaluate, your personal history of cancer and then look at the whole family history of cancer to see if it looks like there's a pattern of something that we're familiar with or that we have in genetic testing available that might answer specific questions about how did this happen, what's the chance of it happening again, who has inherited this risk, and what kind of screening and prevention would be useful for this family to either prevent cancer or very early detection when it's a much more curable, treatable situation. Okay. So I always like to throw in a little levity in my talks. A lot of times when we're dealing with families, it's good that the information is applicable to many people. It's bad if people use it against each other. And we are talking about risks, so it would be nice if we lived in a risk-free world, but that's not the experience in human life. And what we're talking about is just one kind of risk. We live with all kinds of risks in the world every day. So just because we're focusing on cancer risk, keep it in its place. It's just one of the little things that we cope with in our life. So what we're doing in genetic counseling is trying to look at what's your perception, what concerns are you coming with, what do we think is the real picture of risk, and how can we share that information so it's understandable and addressable, and what can we do to manage the risk. So the vast majority of the time when somebody gets cancer, we feel it's sporadic, meaning that you didn't inherit information from your parents that contributed to this cancer. Most of us just live long enough on the planet that things change in some of our cells randomly, and those changes can lead to development of a cancer. So what we're trying to sort out in taking your family histories and the cancer histories is what is a small portion of cancers, 5 to 10%, where there could be an inherited genetic cause that contributed a big factor to this cancer happening. So DNA, just to go back to orient you where that is, that's a picture of a basic cell at the top. The center is the nucleus. The chromosomes are in the nucleus, and the chromosomes are made of DNA, that twisted ladder molecule. And there's only 4 different kinds. You notice the 4 different colors here represent the 4 kinds of steps or base pairs that make up DNA. And DNA is a code. I like to tell people it's like a 4-letter alphabet, and it spells out 3-letter words. And it's very important that the words are correct, the sequence of the words are correct. If you looked at a picture of human chromosomes from one cell, this is just to remind people there's 2 of every kind of chromosome. You got 1 from your mom and 1 from your dad, and they came together at conception, and from that point on, all the chromosomes are copied and packaged into every cell from conception on. So we can do a blood test, and we can look in the DNA in the blood cells. It should be the same as the DNA in all the other cells of your body. So if we were testing for the breast cancer genes, we know those genes are located in chromosome 17, 1 from mom, 1 from dad, and chromosome 13, 1 from mom, 1 from dad. There are several different colon cancer genes that are on 2 and 3 and 5. So you can see it doesn't really matter the location of these genes. This is just a map that points to where the city is that we're interested in looking in. So the DNA codes for proteins that are important to keep our cells functioning from development all the way through to the end of our lives. What we're looking for when we know the sequence of the DNA for a certain gene is we're checking those steps of the ladder to see if they are all accurate and correct. Any change in the DNA sequence leads to a change in the protein and can make a protein that doesn't function properly. And this can be the first step in triggering a cell to transform into a cancerous type of cell. Lots of different causes of why those mutations occur. Most of the time, it's just random events. The cell copied the DNA at that spot and made a mistake, and now there's a new change in the DNA that wasn't there before. Or something from the outside damaged the DNA. We know that X-rays, there are chemicals in cigarette smokes. We know a few things that cause those mutations. The vast majority of mutations we have no idea and probably have absolutely no control over and can't prevent them. I like to tell people when they come in for counseling that if our DNA never changed, we would never age and species would never evolve. It's those changes in the DNA that keep things moving. So it's kind of inevitable that we live with some of that. Okay, so I remember I said four-letter alphabet, three-letter words. So these aren't exactly three-letter words, but to get the concept across that it's very important that every step of the DNA line up properly in order for the message to be translated properly. All it takes is one tiny little change of a few letters or even an addition of a single letter, and suddenly you shift everything and that message isn't correct and the whole protein can be affected by one little change in the DNA. That's how important the sequence is. So we talked before that, that most of the time you weren't born with any of these changes. Every time a cell, every time a cell divides, there's an opportunity for a new change or something to damage the DNA. And once it's changed in one cell, that change is immortalized in all of the descendants from that cell. And this is how a tumor grows, is you have one cell that's the progenitor, and it starts growing and dividing and forms a whole clone of cells, and that becomes a tumor. There are more progressive changes, but it all starts from one cell. That's the initial trigger. What we're looking for are the other small cases where there is a mutation that was present either in the sperm cell or the egg cell that led to conception and got copied into every cell in that person's body. Now, most of the conditions that we test for only affect certain areas of the body, even though it was inherited at birth and it's present in all the cells. And that's because certain proteins are really critical in some areas of the body and not so important in other areas. So for instance, if you have a change in the breast cancer, the BRCA genes, even though that's in all the cells of the body, the cancer risk is mainly to breast cells and ovary cells and to some extent prostate cells. We don't see cancers growing in the other parts of the body, so that must be where that protein is really important. And we don't know exactly why, but we know that those are all cells that are really depend on hormone stimulation, so maybe that's part of the clue. Cancer is genetic. It's changes in genes that allow cells to follow a course to becoming a malignant cell. And what that is cells growing and dividing out of control, not doing their job anymore, forming a tumor and starting to impinge on other healthy cells in that area, and developing the capability of moving and setting up shop in other areas of the body as well. The way we like to describe how inherited cancers work is that most of the time people are born with two working copies of the cancer genes that we know about. And most of these genes act like the brakes on a car. So if you have two working brakes, even if something happens to one, this brake fails, you still have one brake working. It's not until later in life, if a second defect knocks out that remaining brake, the cell starts cycling out of control and forming a tumor. People that have inherited forms of cancer risk start out life at this second step. One of the two genes isn't working properly, and that was inherited from a parent. So they're working on one set of brakes, and there's no backup. Anytime that a second mutation knocks out the remaining copy, you run into a tumor growing. So these conditions, by and large, follow what's called autosomal dominant inheritance. You probably remember that from high school. So autosomal just means it's on one of the chromosomes that men and women share in common. It's not on the sex chromosomes. So it can be inherited from a dad just as easily as a mom. It can be passed on to a son just as easily as a daughter. That applies to the breast cancer genes, the colon cancer genes, virtually every cancer risk gene. Even if men don't have the right equipment, they don't have any ovary cells, they don't have very many breast cells, they don't have a lot of cancer risk from carrying these, but they can pass it on just as easily as a woman can. So the three common inherited cancer conditions I'm just going to briefly talk about today are inherited breast ovarian cancer, the most common inherited colon cancer, and then the next most common colon cancer syndrome, which is really not very common at all, but it really is third on the list. So let's just go over the breast ovarian cancer risks. So these pie charts represent all breast cancer. Only a small portion, about 5 to 10%, are due to a specific gene having a mutation that was inherited from a parent. There are probably other families where there are small genetic contributions to the risk of breast cancer. We don't know how to test for these yet. We don't understand those genes. And the vast majority of breast cancer probably has nothing to do with what you inherited from your parents. But this little slice of the pie is what I'm trying to get at when I take a family history and am looking for a pattern that suggests that there is a significant genetic contribution in a family, because we have tests for at least two of the main genes that cause inherited high risk for breast cancer. And the ovarian cancer pie looks very similar, a little more simplistic. About 10% of ovarian cancers are related to a specific inherited genetic risk. So the two common BRCA mutations, you hear about them in the news a lot these days. There's been a couple articles just in the past week that we'll talk about. But BRCA1 was discovered first, just stands for breast cancer 1. And people who have a change in this gene have about a 55 to 65% chance of getting breast cancer sometime in their life. That's compared to a 10 to 12% risk for the average woman. So it's about 5 or 6 times the average person's risk. And if you've had breast cancer once, this was just in the news this morning, a brand new paper looking at the chance of getting a second breast cancer, and it's very high. It's almost as high as the chance of getting a first breast cancer. And that's because that change is programmed into every breast cell. And the breast cells on one side don't know what happened on the other side. They have an independent risk of developing a cancer someday. So we have to watch women that are carriers much more carefully, even if they've already had breast cancer once. The risk for ovarian cancer, about 40%. The average woman only has about 1.8% risk. So it's many, many times higher than the average woman. And so if we know that ahead of time, we're going to want to do something to protect women from this really awful cancer. BRCA2 is the other main high breast cancer risk gene. The breast cancer risk is a little bit lower, but still multiple times higher than the average woman. The risk, again, of getting a second breast cancer if you've had one is high. The risk for male breast cancer is only about half as much as the average woman, but many, many times higher than the average man. The average man only has 1 in 1,000 chances of getting breast cancer. And here the ovarian cancer risk is lower. It's not 40%, but it's still 10 times higher than the average woman's risk. There's a few other cancers that have slightly increased risks with BRCA2, notably the pancreatic cancer risk and the melanoma, as well as prostate we talked about before. In the general population, so NPR got it wrong this morning. They announced to the nation that 1 in 40 people carries a BRCA mutation, but it's 1 in 40 people if you're Ashkenazi Jewish. If you're not, it's about 1 in 400 chances. So these are not exceedingly common, but they're common enough that you'll know a few people probably in the world that carry a mutation in one of these genes. There are a few other conditions that we also consider when we're going through these family histories. BRCA1 and 2 are not the whole picture for inherited breast cancer. These other conditions are much, much more rare and usually have some other features that go with them. So we're looking for those when we see people. And, you know, to be honest, about 3/4 of the time, when you have a strong, multi-generational history of many young breast cancers, you're going to find a BRCA mutation, but about 25% of the time you're not. And that means that there are still other genes that look like BRCA1 or 2 that are somewhere else, and we don't have an effective test. And that's a really important point, because if we do the test and we don't find a mutation, that doesn't mean you don't have a genetic risk. We don't know all the genes. We can't test for all the genes. So we have to look at the family and say, what do we know? And what do we know from the test? And what do we think is still the chance of breast cancer when all the pieces are put together? Okay. All right, just moving on to colon cancer risk then. A little more complicated pie here, but most colon cancers still have no genetic connection whatsoever. There are some families that look like they have clusters. Again, genes that may cause smaller risks. There's a few few conditions here. This only is 5%, and these are less than 1% of colon cancers where there is a specific inherited gene mutation, again, causing a high risk for colon cancer. So if you just look in the general population, 5 to 6% of all people get colon cancer. Most of the time it's age 65 or beyond. That's why we start colonoscopy screening at 50. We want to be ahead of cancers growing and try and catch them when they're polyps and get them out. If you have relatives with colon cancer, your statistical risk will go up. If you have one of the gene mutations that we know how to test for, you have an exceedingly high risk for colon cancer. So 80% in this HNPCC condition, almost 100% with the FAP condition. So I'm not going to go into the details of this, but this just shows that here's that FAP condition is caused by mutations that you inherit in these genes, and that is the first trigger in a pathway that changes a normal colon cell to a cancer cell. And the other condition, the HNPCC condition, is a different pathway. If you have mutations in these genes, you lead to colon cancer. So 2 different pathways we know of that can cause colon cancer, and there's probably more that we don't know about. So HNPCC stands for hereditary non-polyposis colon cancer, also known as Lynch syndrome by the doctor who first described families with this. The age at which people get colon cancer in these families, remember it's an 80% chance if you have a mutation, and the average age is 45 years. I've seen kids as young as 17 with colon cancer with this condition. And it can be later, and it's possible to be one of the lucky 1 in 5 who never gets colon cancer, but really high chance that it could happen. The colon cancers tend to be higher up in the colon in the inherited form compared to lower down in sporadic form, but both of them can occur anywhere. And the other main cancer seen in these families is uterine cancer. About 45% chance of a woman would develop uterine cancer if she carries a mutation. Other cancers seen in these families at less but still measurably higher than the general population are ovarian cancer, stomach cancer, small intestines, urinary tract, bile duct. There's a few families where they have a subtype where they can have some skin tumors called sebaceous adenomas or brain tumors. But the majority of it is up here. This is just a colonoscopy picture, and you can see this little bump here. That's a polyp. So take a look at it by comparison. This is the other inherited cancer condition called familial adenomatous polyposis, or FAP. So here's the polyposis. Polyposis means not just a polyp here or there, but hundreds to thousands of polyps. And this can develop often during the 2nd decade of life. So families that have the classic form, we start colonoscopies in 10-year-olds because during the 2nd decade of life, they start growing polyps. And we try and keep ahead of them until the point where there's just too many polyps to take out. And so the treatment for FAP at this point is really to remove the colon when you can't keep up with the polyps anymore. And it sounds drastic, but the alternative is that they're almost inevitably going to get colon cancer. And I've seen kids die of colon cancer with this condition. So we take it very seriously, and people who get their colon out remove almost all the risk that they have, and they survive. So it's important to know about. Okay, so what do we do for families where we can identify that there is an inherited risk running in the family? Basically, it falls into 3 different baskets. Sometimes we don't have an effective screening test or other measures that can help lower the risk, and really removing the organ that's at risk is the most efficacious, way to treat that. So that's an example of the FAP families. We don't have a good way to handle all of those polyps that are all precancers. The safest way that we can take care of those people is to remove the colon and prevent the cancer risk. So for some things like high breast cancer risk, we're developing better and better screening tests. So we now have breast MRIs. They've been shown to be, over about 90-95% effective in catching cancers when they're very small, very treatable, may not even need chemotherapy or other treatments, and so many women are opting for screening for that. In HMPCC, they have a high risk for colon cancer, but colonoscopy is very effective in those families. The polyps come up one at a time. We do colonoscopies every year. We can get them out before they turn into cancer, and they have a dramatic drop in their risk of ever getting a colon cancer as long as they keep on their screening schedule. And sometimes we have preventive medications. So we have some medications to reduce breast cancer risk. We have some medications that can slow down the rate of polyp growth in the colon. So we'll tell you what's available now, and there's new things that are happening all the time. So it's really important for people that are carriers to stay involved with what's happening in genetics, because I like to tell people the picture only gets better, it never gets worse. We learn more things, we can do more things. The next generation is going to have more choices than we have today. So just a little bit more about what we do in the counseling process here. We think it's important, it's not just a test result, it's a test result relative to what's going on in your family. So just like I said, getting a normal test result isn't the whole picture because we don't know all the genes that can cause inherited risk. So unless there's been a specific mutation identified in your family, we don't know if a negative test really has lowered your risk at all. Okay? So it's important to put it in context and make sure you're getting the right information out of those tests. What we're trying to do in counseling is make sure people understand the information and make the best decisions for themselves based on accurate risk information. And also that we learn, we figure out how to communicate it, because it's not just you, it's usually a whole lot of people that are involved in sharing that information about their risk. So I'm on the phone all the time. Kathy can tell you I was just on the phone before I walked in here doing these 3-generation pedigrees, and that means asking about your health, your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, and your cousins, and your children. And I want to look at the whole picture, because sometimes what's happening in other branches of the family means a whole lot to you, even though it's not your immediate family. We often have been able to figure out, because of something going on in cousins and second cousins, what we need to be concerned about for a less affected branch of the family. What I'm asking about is how many people were in the family, how many males and females, approximately their age, anybody that's had cancer, or any of the things that can lead to cancer, like those polyps, sometimes physical features that are connected with some of the rare conditions. Finding out what age it was diagnosed, because remember, age is critical in these inherited conditions. The cancers tend to happen a lot younger in the inherited families, so that helps us distinguish a lot. Where did the cancer start? That it wasn't a metastases that we're talking about. We're talking about really the original cancer, so that I have the right information to do the assessment. And race and ethnicity can be important, because just like you saw Ashkenazi Jewish people have a much higher BRCA carrier rate. And there's other ethnic backgrounds that have different founder mutations we need to take into consideration. So this is something less than a 3-generation pedigree. I would actually ask about the cousins over here too. So here's the person that's giving me the information, and their sister, and their mother, and their father, and here's their aunt with breast cancer here, and grandmother with breast cancer on their dad's side. So I'm often, it's 2 things I'm doing with family history. I'm often sending people back to verify, did you get the right information? Because just Friday, I guess, I saw somebody who came in to their oncologist, and she's got a new breast cancer. She's 50-something, and she told the oncologist her aunt had ovarian cancer at a young age, but then survived and had another cancer later on. And so she got urgently referred to get tested to find out if she's got a mutation, because that might change the surgery that they did. Well, she made a call back to Japan, and it turns out her aunt had uterine cancer, not ovarian cancer, and her risk for BRCA mutation plummeted to the point where she's not even going to get insurance coverage for the test. And really the chance of those being related has become minutely small. So getting the right information makes a huge difference in how useful these tests are, how likely it is something's going to show up, and what we tell you, even if the test is negative. If it was ovarian cancer, I'd still be worried about ovarian cancer in her family, even if the test result is negative, because I know it's not a comprehensive test. If it's uterine cancer, I'm worried about a completely different thing that's a little easier to manage, right? And the last important part about the test is we're always trying to redetect. I often have this person calling me, the unaffected, worried, well person who has a family history of cancers. That looks kind of ominous, right? But this person and this had colon cancer, and this person's alive. It's much better if we can talk to this person and provide a test for them to find out if the tests we have explain why they got colon cancer, and then we know that that is a useful test to the unaffected people. If I just do the test on this person and it's normal, I don't know what to tell her, because I don't know if that gene is changed in her dad, and that's what's causing the family history, or whether her dad's test would be perfectly normal too, and she still has this big family history, and we did nothing to change her risk or add information. So if we can test an affected person first, it gives the most information for all the other people in the family. It gives this person information too, because of those other cancers that can be elevated in HNPCC. He would have new screening guidelines to follow too, besides just the colon cancer risk. Okay, so we've hit on a number of these things, but what I'm looking for in the family histories are more people in the family with cancer than you'd expect, young cancers, rare cancers, unusually early ages of cancers, women that have 2 different breast cancers. That's a big red flag. There could be an underlying genetic risk. Male breast cancer. A person who has had multiple cancers, we would look at and trying to figure out, is there any way we can piece those together with a unifying cause that we have a test for? So again, testing the affected person first is always the best strategy for the family. We talk about insurance. We talk about people's concerns about discrimination. This has changed dramatically over the years. So 10 years ago, when we started testing people at Stanford, people were still, we had all of our files were under, under deep cover. They were, they're file protected in medical records, and nobody could access them, and everyone wanted to keep the results, like, we used coded words to communicate with the doctors about this person has a high risk, but not really stating what it was. And since that time, there have been laws passed in virtually every state in the United States, because insurances are regulated by state insurance commissioners, right, and laws. And the federal government has passed laws on a second level to prohibit insurance companies from using genetic test results against people. So it is illegal for an insurance company to raise your rates or exclude you from insurance, or exclude a group or change a group rate based on a genetic test result. I always caution people that if you're trying to get individual insurance, they're going to ask you, have you ever had cancer? They're going to ask if people in your family have had cancer. And if you have a long laundry list of cancers, That's legitimate for insurance companies to use to assess your risk. And you can have insurance problems because of the actual diagnoses of cancer, but they cannot use the genetic test results against you. So people shouldn't be worried that the genetic test is going to add anything to their risk. It's illegal for that to happen. Let's see. So we talk a lot about, what's going on in the family. How are we going to share this information if it's relevant to other people and avoid some of the landmines that exist in just about every one of our families? We talk about the cost. We talk about insurance coverage and if it's likely to be covered. What results mean before we get tests. And testing of minors is an interesting topic because once information is known in a family, there's this urgency of parents to want to know that their kids are okay. But you have to stop and think about, there's nothing we're going to do for those children for most of these conditions. They don't have risks for childhood cancers. Shouldn't they get the chance to grow up and make their own decision about if and when they want to find it out and when it's going to affect their medical management? So we try to discourage people from going down that road if it's not important to the child. There's a few conditions where it is important, like that FAP. We're going to screen children for cancer risk, and so we need to know when they're children. I think the benefits of knowing whether there is an inherited risk is that we have better guidelines of how to manage you. We step up a lot of screening for most of these conditions. We sometimes start screening for other cancers that we didn't know about until we had the test results. And people now have an explanation for what happened. No second guessing, what did I do, what did I eat, what did I take that might have been related to this. We know that it was a gene and nothing else that anybody did. One of the most important things is if you identify a mutation, you have now provided a tool for other people in the family to find out if they've inherited or not inherited the risk. Do they need to be screened, or do they not need to worry about their family history at all? And since it's a 50-50 chance that, that you inherit this, about half the people in the family kind of get a get out of jail free card. We've proven what caused the cancer, and we've proven they didn't inherit it. So I think that, today, we used to be a lot more worried about the social, insurance, financial risks of doing the test. Now we're more worried about the psychological risk. Are you well enough informed that you feel prepared for the test result? You have an action plan. The information is going to be useful to you and not be, so much of a burden. And I think that's really important, why it's important to have the discussion before you do the test. So that if you get a call and we need to talk to you about something and there is a finding in your test result, that you know what that means. You know what we're going to be able to do to address that and keep the risk under control. Talking to the family members that you're going through this process so that they're prepared to know that there's going to be some information coming is important because, some of them might tell you they don't want to know. And many of my families strategize about who's the best person, that's kind of like the leader of the family that is recognized as the medical expert or, has the better relationships with everyone or, can make the best use of getting it to the people who can and will use it. Okay, so, sorry about this. So just specifically, because we've been, I don't know if it's because there have been news articles recently about insurance discrimination laws, but at 10 years ago, every person, that was like the first question out of their mouth is, well, what about my insurance? Or what's this going to do to me? And that kind of disappeared over time, and it's kind of making a resurgence. So California has very specific laws in the insurance code sections prohibiting insurances that do business in California from using this information to determine what the cost is going to be, whether they're going to insure you or not. They can't require information. They can't require you to do tests, and they cannot require you to disclose the results unless you give permission. They can't use it, employers in California can't use it in terms of affecting your employment. And we have some of the most stringent laws in the country, so we're kind of lucky. Other states have modified versions. Some are as strong as this, and some are weaker than this. But then also what's happened is part of the HIPAA law that was passed at the end of the 90s included prohibition from insurances using genetic test results, but it only applied to group insurance. So for years, there's been lobbying going on to try and get an additional law that covered all health insurance. That passed in 2008, and it got implemented this year. And so that's the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. So we're protected at 2 different levels from insurance companies using genetic information. And the ADA has also been invoked by lawyers to protect people from employment discrimination based on having a genetic issue. All right, so just because this is the most common test, I use it as an example of the cost. This is an expensive test, and this was also in the news last year. There's one company in the Western Hemisphere that does the tests. They have a patent on the way that the tests are analyzed. They have not licensed it. They charge over $3,000 for the test. We're in an era where genetic testing technology is rapidly evolving, and the test cost is coming down. But it hasn't gone down at Myriad, surprisingly enough. So this was a court case to challenge their patents, and the judge ruled that it's illegal for them to have a patent on these genes. They can still appeal to the Supreme Court. I don't expect things to change overnight, but I expect them to go out of business, either because they've lost their lawsuit and everyone can do the test, or probably more likely that the new generation of genetic tests are supplanting the way that this sequencing test is done, and it's going to become obsolete. So one way or another, I think the cost is going to come down, but this is what it is right now. $3,000 unless you're Ashkenazi Jewish, and we know exactly the prime candidates to test for. If you already have a mutation that's been found in the family, you don't need to go back to square one. You can test for that particular site in any other family member. So yes, no test, it's much less expensive. Just to finish up, in addition to all the genetic information, I think we like to think one of our roles is to make sure that people find the new place in their life, the balance with this new genetic information that I have this risk, I'm dealing with it the best I can, and how do I put that into a box on the shelf that I take out the one time a year when I have to go and screen for screening, or 2 times a year, and other than that, it's not interfering with the rest of my life. So we have a lot of people that sort of specialize in dealing with cancer risk. There are online support groups, there are publications, there are peer-to-peer contacts, so I often put a patient who's just found out the information in touch with somebody who's tested positive for that condition that's in their same life phase. Just how do they get through that tunnel and kind of make it a manageable thing in their life. So hopefully, we can take a look at the risks in our life and look at what we can do to quantify them, find out a good strategy for managing them, keep the risks as low as possible, and go on living our life. So we're here to help you. Make those transitions, get the information that you need, and get the right kind of medical care to keep you healthy. So that's all I have.
So just thank you, everybody, for coming. And well, why don't you stay up here? Because we can always answer questions together. So we're happy to answer any questions. You can have general questions, some specific questions. We may not be able to give you, detailed specific information about your particular family or, information related to that. But we do actually have a cancer genetics clinic that if you think that you might be interested in pursuing testing and qualify for testing, you can have your physician send a referral to Kathy Hesser, and we meet once a month.
I have a question. What happens if you don't know your family history and you were adopted, so you have no way to know anything? So
presumably because you might pass on to your children.
Right. So presumably you're calling because there's been some incident of cancer and you don't know whether there might be others in the family? Is that what you mean?
No.
Or nothing's happened, you're just adopted and you don't know?
Nothing has happened as far as cancer.
Right.
you know.
So we really
yeah,
don't.
or possibly in the lifetime.
Yeah.
But you have no way to provide information to your children.
Right. So if there's never been any cancer, then we probably wouldn't be advocating doing genetic tests for cancer risk because we have nothing to go on, you know, no reason to believe that there's a high risk in this family, and no insurance company that's going to pay for, you know, an undefined potential genetic risk based on no family history. However, there are in some of the insurance forms, if somebody has an early age cancer and they're adopted and they don't know about the rest of the family history, they will take that into consideration. Yeah. So, yeah. So we try and level it in without going to the extreme of assuming that if you don't know any history of any cancers, you know, we should test for everything because you don't know anything. I mean, that's thousands and thousands of dollars for testing for something we don't even know is an issue.
Now, on my husband's side, there is a history of cancer.
Yeah, so we're looking for how many people are the cancers related, was it young age of diagnosis, you know, is there a contiguous pattern, it looks like it's tracking along one branch because these are autosomal dominantly inherited.
And I think it's an important point to also bring up that we've been talking a lot about breast and ovary cancer, but they can also be transmitted through the father side. So, you know, there are individuals who think, well, I don't need to worry because all the breast cancer is on my dad's side and he can still pass that gene on. So we need to understand both sides of the family. Yes?
So let's say that you had a family history and you're interested in taking this to the next step. Can you walk us through what the process is? I mean, is it a blood test? Is it?
And you're unaffected? No cancer?
So far, yeah.
Right. So then I would suggest that we strategize about, is there any living affected person who might be a better candidate to do the test first? Because if I test you and you're negative, I don't know what that means. If no one affected person has been tested, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
But the test itself is actually just a blood test.
Yeah.
It is a
So it's just like getting a blood test that you have, you know, through your regular doctor. Your blood is sent to the appropriate lab where the DNA is removed and sequenced and then analyzed, and then the results are sent back. So the way we do it in our cancer genetics clinic is if you've been identified as somebody who might benefit from counseling and testing, then we have a referral that comes through Kathy, who then passes on the information to Nikki and myself. And then she generally makes a phone call first to exactly do that first layer of screening to see, well, are you the best person to test, or is there someone else who might be better? And then we have an information session, a consultation, where the individual comes in, can bring family members, to actually go through and talk more one-on-one in detail about the specific case and give information and talk about the whole consent process. What does it mean to get a test done? What does it mean to get a positive result, a negative result? There's also some ambiguous results. And then if the individual elects to proceed with testing, we actually draw the blood on that visit, provided, you know, everything's okay in terms of the insurance payments or co-payments. And then generally the test results come back fairly quickly. We've had some that turn over actually as fast as 3 days and sometimes, you know, maybe a week or so. So again, as the process of sequencing it becomes more advanced, we're probably going to be able to test for these, you know, much quicker.
And then, sorry, just to add on to that, if your family member that is still alive isn't in this country, right, which I'm sure there's others of us in this room that might have that situation, how do we?
Well, genetics is done all over the world, and, you know, in some places, if you can get to a metropolitan center, there's likely to be genetic services. Blood samples are FedExed all over the world. You know, you can get a blood sample drawn in Japan and it can be tested, you know, in Salt Lake City in the next day or two. So it is possible to do that. Sometimes it takes more wherewithal if you're, you know, in a more remote area, and sometimes it takes resources because there's a lot of countries where people don't have good insurance coverage or nationalized health plans. But it can be done if there's a will. Yeah.
Should we be persistent with our physicians as far as if we have a young family history of death in the family, and the physician is telling you, oh, it's probably just environmental. My maternal grandmother died at the age of 36 of pancreatic cancer. I lost my mother at the age of 48 of renal cell. So they're saying that those are kind of environmental cancers. Should we just tell them, no, we would like genetic counseling and proceed with that, or?
So that's a slightly trickier question to answer, because first of all, as we said, the person that we'd really like to test are the affected individuals, and they're not present. The renal cancer, kidney cancer doesn't fall into a straightforward syndrome that we've readily identified right now. So I think you have a family history, and in many ways, family history often trumps genetics, because we don't know, what the genes are for certain things. So, I would say that, you should talk to your doctor. You can go through Kathy and even maybe have a conversation with Nikki a little bit afterwards. But generally, you just have to be a little bit more vigilant. But those are also cancers we don't screen for right now, because we don't have good screening tests for them. So there are cancer syndromes in their families where definitely there's a lot of different cancers that don't seem to follow patterns. And there are a lot of other genes that can be affected.
I had a question. What if you have a family member who had cancer and is considered cured? Is that person worth testing?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, because these are genes, these are changes in genes that are passed on from parent to child. So they're actually present in every cell of the body. So they're not just present in the cancer cell, but they're actually present in every cell of the body. So even though that person has been cured of their cancer, they still have those genes present in their blood. So that's exactly the person that we would want to be testing.
Okay, I have a question. My mother died of breast cancer. I had ovarian cancer in '77, was diagnosed, and I had surgery. Doctors gave me 6 months to live, but I'm still here.
That's enough. That's enough.
Don't pass go.
Anyways, who should get tested?
You should.
Or my,
You
'cause
should.
I have 2 daughters.
You should be
You
tested.
should be tested. You're the affected.
You're the person who
Why
should be
would
tested.
I be, I've probably got cancer someplace.
No, we're not testing for cancer. What we're testing for is the genes that may have caused your cancer. And if you have one of those genes, then we can say with quite a bit of confidence that the cancer that you developed was because of those genes, and then we can test your children. So
But if-
you're,
Like, what's different is with me, is my mother died, so they can't test my mother, but they could get a negative in me, because.
and we
I'm
wouldn't
not-
know.
Yeah.
And we don't know what it
I
means.
would be a good candidate.
Yes.
You are the appropriate candidate
Yes.
to test. Yes, you're not only the good candidate. You're actually you are the person who should be tested.
Right.
I always thought that it would be my children.
If we find an abnormality in your test, we would then test your children.
Because then we would know that the test is meaningful to your children. If we just test your children and they're normal, we don't know if that's a meaningful result, because we don't have any proof that these genes caused your cancer. So we have to test you first to see if it caused your cancer, and then we know that the test is good for your children.
Well, when I go to the doctor, he always tests for
No,
blood tests. For
no, this is different. This is not picked up in the blood tests that we do for your cholesterol or your liver function or your kidney function. It's a very specific test. A doctor cannot authorize or cannot order this test without discussing it with you and getting the consent. You have to sign a piece of paper that says you understand what the reasons are for this test.
And how much does that test cost?
That's a test.
That's
that we're saying
it's the expensive test, but if I'm
3,000?
if I'm hearing your history correct, it would be covered by Medicare.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, if that's the right history, that would qualify for Medicare coverage.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
My mother died of cancer at 47, and I don't know, because I was only 15, I don't know what kind of cancer it was. It was a nodule on the roof of her mouth, and it went through her whole body. So I don't think it was like a lung cancer or anything. She was a very heavy smoker. And then my fraternal brother, twin brother, died of kidney cancer. And I have been told there are 5 others on my mother's side of the family who have had cancer, not necessarily died of it, but have had it. I have a son who smokes, and I'm a little concerned about that. Should I be tested for anything?
No, so there's, again, so you not having had any cancer really doesn't make a genetic test particularly useful. The kind of cancer you're sort of describing in your mother can also be tobacco related. Definitely when we talk about environmental agents, tobacco use is probably the #1 cause of cancers that we see. Cancers of the head and neck, the lungs, even bladder cancer are actually seen more commonly in individuals who smoke.
And oral
cervical
cancers.
oral cancers. So I would venture a guess that your mother's cancer is related to the tobacco. I don't know if your brother smoked. But
no, but he lived in a household for 6.5 years of very heavy smokers.
Right.
And neither he or I ever smoked.
right, so
that's also smoke related?
the kidney cancer less so, but I think just for your mother most likely, and for the other family members, I think that's important too. Now, I think the important information, or the important point I want to make with your question is that really it's important to understand if you have relatives who are alive who've had cancer, to really try to probe them a little bit about what kind of cancer did they have. For example, breast cancer often will start off in the breast but then spreads to the liver or the bone or the brain, and someone may actually say, oh, my aunt actually died of bone cancer, but it wasn't bone cancer, it was actually breast cancer that traveled to the bone. So I would encourage everybody when they have interactions with family members, especially extended family, to really try to probe a little bit more and get that kind of information. Was it in the roof of the mouth? Did they have their breast removed? Get more of that kind of history.